Step into the captivating world of the Behind the Curtain podcast, where your dynamic hosts, John Dyer and Dr. Mohamed Saleh, bring together a wealth of 60 years of combined experience in healthcare and manufacturing. Join us every week as we delve into intriguing topics, weaving unscripted conversations that promise to take you on an unpredictable and enlightening journey. Gain valuable insights for your continuous improvement adventure as we navigate uncharted territories with enthusiasm and expertise. Welcome to a podcast that goes beyond the ordinary, unraveling the mysteries behind the curtain of knowledge.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Behind the Curtain. I'm your co-host, Mohamed Saleh, and with me is your other co-host, John Dyer. And today we're going to talk about and continue talking about leadership. And specifically, we're going to dive into this concept of the facade of excellence. And so we're going to do it a little bit different today. And John, I know you just finished recording your book. And so very curious, how was that experience?
It was very cool, kind of grueling, but very cool. It's exactly what you probably pictured. You know, I went to a sound studio and I got put in a soundproof booth with a microphone and a tablet with my book laid out on it. And a sound engineer was in one of those big rooms with a huge sound mixer board. And he had the same version of the book. So he was following along exactly as I was reading. And if I made any mistakes, right, any kind of stumble on a word or mispronounce something, he would have me stop, back up to the beginning of that sentence and start again. And then he would edit it all together. But the microphone, super sensitive. I mean, it picked up every little sound. So it's like if I moved in my, I was sitting on a stool. If I moved and the stool creaked, even just the slightest little bit, he'd say, "All right, stop. I heard your stool. We got to start back at the beginning." He had to turn the air conditioner off because the air conditioner would make too much noise. And I tell you, this was crazy. One time I was reading through and I heard just the slightest little rumbling in my earphones. And he was like, "Okay, we got to stop and go back to the beginning of that sentence." And he said that there's a rock quarry that was several miles away. And once or twice a day, they blow up the rock quarry and the rumbling works through the ground and it comes through the microphone. So I'm like, great. But I tell you, it's a challenge, when you're in there reading something for that long, right? Each chapter would take about 45 minutes to an hour to read through. And we would try to knock 2 chapters out at a time. And I tell you, your mind starts to wander, right? When you're reading along and then all of a sudden you start thinking about, this or that. And then you miss a word and he's like, "Okay, stop, back up. Got to redo that." So it was a challenge, and 2 full days of sitting in a sound booth reading through it. But it was very cool. As people who've had a chance to read my book knows, the Façade of Excellence, half of each chapter is a story that involves different characters. And all these characters are based on people that have been in my past, right? In my career, every one of the stories is based on actual events, but I had to change up the names and things to protect people. So it was pretty cool giving a voice to these characters that I'd only been able to do in writing. Now I didn't change, my voice in any way as far as like a female voice or male voice. No, nothing like that. So don't get worried about that. But I was able to give them some emotion, right? So like when Frank Smith gets really angry and pounds the table and starts yelling at people, I could give him that sense of anger
Uh-huh.
in the tone of my voice. So that was a lot of fun. That was very cool. But we'll see. It should be done with the editing process in a few more days, and then I'm not sure exactly when the release date will be, but it'll be available to buy the audio book version.
Well, if our listeners haven't had the opportunity to purchase your book, the hard copy, I would highly recommend it. I've used it. I've used it with many of my clients. I've used it with many of my students in the university setting. And the fact that you could walk away understanding what mode you should operate in as a leader, I think really has significant depth once you read that book, and an appreciation to it. So highly
But
recommend it for everyone. I've read it many times, and it's one of my favorite books.
well, I very much appreciate that, and it was a labor of love. The only regret is that it came out right before COVID hit. So it's been a challenge to get word out, right, and get people to actually take the time to read it. But I do think it's different than any other book that's out there. I mean, it doesn't rehash a bunch of tools or methodology. It gets into more of the psyche and the culture. And I
Yeah,
tell you, and these characters, like I said, are based on real life people. And three different times as I'm reading it, I got choked up, and reliving those past experiences. I mean, one point I had literally tears in my eyes, and I had to stop because I couldn't see the words anymore. I was
oh,
like,
oh my
okay, I
God.
gotta I gotta take a break here. Give me a minute, because it just hit home with these characters as far as hey, these are real people that have real emotions. And we tend to think sometimes as lean experts or improvement leaders or whatever that, it's all about getting the improvement to happen. Well, it's deeper than that. When you're trying to change the culture, you got to build relationships with people. And these are real people with real lives, real families, real interests, real concerns, that that you got to treat with a whole different level of respect to make this work.
Yeah, yeah. I want to comment on just two things that you just said here. Is the first one is I'm just thinking through if I would listen to your book rather than read it, I probably would enjoy it just as much, if not more, because it is a story. And so you could actually drift in the story and actually see it. And I think many of our listeners have witnessed this in real life, and so they could sink into the story too. So I'm actually very excited about that.
Right.
The second thing is I'm curious, was there there's a lot of places in that book that you could get choked up. And so was there any main ones and that you want to kind of highlight?
Yeah, the first one actually is right in the very first chapter. So
Oh,
if people haven't had a chance to read the book yet, you can actually go on Amazon and download the first chapter for free. It's kind of a preview chapter. So if you want to do that, what I'm about to say will make a lot more sense. But there's a lot of subtleties in the book and a lot of clues that you really have to pay close attention to understand what's truly going on in the background of the story. So the opening scene is we have a brand new vice president. His name is Jim Brown, and he's an executive. He's new to the company, and he wants to do the improvements the right way. And so, but he's fairly young. He's fairly new in his career. He's got a lot to learn, but he has his heart in the right place, and that's the most important thing, right? So in the very first scene, he gets to work early. He's in the parking lot. No one is there because no one gets there early, which is a sign that no one really cares that
motive.
much,
Yeah.
And he meets the security officer.
Oh,
Um,
yes,
yeah,
Joe.
Joe Britton. Yep. And Joe, the clues that he picks up on, Jim Brown picks up on in this first interaction with Joe,
Yeah.
the security guard. first of all, the many of the parking lot lights are burned out, so the place is in darkness, which tells Jim that maybe this company doesn't really care about the safety of their employees that much. Joe explains that his equipment doesn't work, his radio doesn't work, and so that even if he had been somebody like a burglar or somebody with ill intent, that Joe would have been in big trouble, which then tells Jim that the company doesn't care about their employees to give them the proper tools and equipment they need to do their job. And then he notices that Joe is drinking coffee from a thermos from home, and he's like, well, why don't you drink the company coffee? And Joe's response is classic. He says, they don't give me working equipment. Do you think they're actually going to pay for my coffee? He said, no, in this company, the philosophy is the employees get barely enough to get the job done and no more, which again is an illustration that this company doesn't care about their employees. They don't go above and beyond in any way to treat their employees like real people.
Yeah, no, I remember that chapter. That was an emotional one for me too. It was and just because we've all met Joes.
Right. Well,
And
and Joe even says, hey, you're the first executive that's really ever spoken to me in my 20 years on the job here.
yeah,
Well, Jim goes through his first day and he's told that, he's got a full agenda. Well, he says, no, cancel these meetings because I got some errands to run. So he goes and runs some errands. And then when Joe comes back to his night shift the next night, there's a box there waiting for him. And it's got all brand new equipment. It's got a coffee maker with coffee and a note from Jim saying, hey, thank you for taking the time to talk to me this morning. The safety of our people has to be top, of top priority. And, hopefully these tools will help you do your job better. And, and by the way, tell me what blend of coffee you really enjoy, and I'll make sure you have that. And it's like, and Joe has a tear in his eye because it's like the first time his 20-year career, anyone has shown any empathy, any bit of caring, any trying to build a relationship. And it's like, wow, this is really something.
yeah, there's two big things for me in that story. The first one is we talk about organizational change that has to be led with respect for people or respecting every individual. And sometimes that's just a slogan that doesn't have any teeth behind it. There's no rituals, there's no Gimba, it's just like, hey, we have to respect our people, but there's no action to it. And I think something that Jim did in this story is really illustrative of, hey, we have to listen to our people, but also we have to follow through with it.
Right.
And he didn't follow through with it. Like, hey, he didn't even delegate it.
Right.
He did it. Like, he rolled up his sleeve and made sure that he had it for the next day, because that time from someone telling you a concern to mitigating that concern is huge. And the second piece that really strikes to me is just the act of being a servant leader.
Right.
He's serving in this story Joe. Like, yeah, and so like he's saying, I work for you, Joe. Like, you need coffee, I'll get you coffee. You need equipment, I'll get you equipment. Like, I work for you. And so it's easy for people to throw around the word respect for people, but it's really it really takes a call to action and a leader's intent to be able to make it happen.
You mentioned Gimba walks, and
Yeah.
that's one of my big pet peeves with Gimba walks, right? If leaders are going out to walk the process to check a box,
Yeah.
to me that's the facade, right? That's fakery. That's not real.
Mm-hmm.
If they're actually taking the time to go out and talk to the employees and find out what their problems are and listening to their ideas for improvement and listening to, what they can do to help them get better, then like you said, and then follow through on that, right? Because it's one thing to walk it.
Mm-hmm.
It's another thing to ask for their thoughts and inputs. But then it's a third thing, and this is the most important thing, is to follow through on
Yeah,
those things. And if
100%.
all three of those things aren't there, then it's just a fakery. It's just a facade.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's what this book is trying to point out, is that it goes much, much deeper than just checking the boxes.
Yeah. What other is there any other areas that choked you up?
Yeah, the second one is kind of in the middle of the book. And in one of our previous podcasts, we talked about the four different styles of leadership.
Yeah.
And in this particular case, they had made it all the way to style 3, which is the team forming leader.
Hmm.
But then a big crisis hits, and Jim Brown realizes that he needs to go back into crisis mode in order to get through this particular crisis. But by this point, they've made a lot of progress, and the
Trust.
trust is there, and the employees are really starting to get engaged. And he's fearful that by going back to crisis mode, they're going to lose all that momentum.
Yeah.
And so he decides to have an all employee meeting. And the only way to do that is to have it out in the parking lot. And he gets a big ladder with a bullhorn to address all the employees. And he explains to them what the crisis is, and explains to them that they're going to have to put some of their improvement efforts on the back burner. But he also gives them his commitment, that within a month it'll all be back on track, that the training will resume and the teams will resume, but they got to get through this crisis. And well, like I said, he explains what the crisis is, and in order to address this particular crisis, it means that some people are going to have to work on the holiday weekend that's coming up.
Hmm.
And all of a sudden, out of nowhere, several of the employees start shouting that they'll be there, they'll work, and we have your back, Jim. And then they all start chiming in, and all the employees say that they'll help out with this crisis. And to me, that's a real tipping point in the book, right? All this time, Jim has been trying to get them on board, trying to change the culture. And when this crisis hits and the employees respond the way they do in the book, it just affirms that they're getting there, that they're reaching that point of collaboration and teamwork. And and it it's kind of emotional. It's like,
Yeah, of
wow,
course, of
we're
course.
we're 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 making progress.
I love that story because there's so many pieces to it. And our listeners really have to read this chapter to really understand all the dynamics that were playing that caused that scene to happen. I remember it. And I remember thinking, I was like, talk about the level of transparency that he had was, was just beyond the norm. But he did a few other things too that I think were subtle, and if you didn't pay attention to it and you just called them out, is he gave them a time-bounded effort.
Right.
A lot of times people say, hey, we have a burning platform, we're in crisis mode. They revert to crisis mode and they stay there forever. Everything's always a crisis now.
Right.
And he's like, it was time bounded, and I thought that was very interesting. And then the other piece that sticks out, there is a lot of leaders that expect when they give that level of transparency that the employees' reaction would be similar to the people in that book. But they miss the ingredient that Jim built trust before they were willing to do that. And some people go out there and be like, hey, we're in a crisis. Why aren't you all rallying?
Right.
Well, you didn't do anything to plant the seeds to get us to rally. And so, I think he was in a place where he already built trust. And so when he became transparent and asked for their help, it worked. But there's a lot of leaders these days that, give the transparency because that's what the book says to do. And then all of a sudden no one's rallying and they're like, and then they just go into brutal force.
Right. Exactly. And then they would announce mandatory overtime.
Yep.
And then all the trust and everything just goes out the window.
Yep.
Everything that had been, yeah. So they revert back to the old style of fear and
Yep.
control and say, all right, we're going to get through this crisis, and you're now all going to have to work mandatory overtime. So give up your, vacation plans.
Yep.
And we're going to get this done. And then they wonder why, when they try to get the teams going again or the improvements going again, why no one wants to participate.
Yeah.
Because it's like, well, this was just all fakery.
100%. 100%. And you said there's a few more?
Yeah, there was one more. This one's towards the end of the book.
Okay.
And Mary is a production worker. And about halfway through the book, she gets introduced, and she's one of my favorite characters in the book.
She is my favorite character.
Yeah, she's great. She's great because she really, I think, demonstrates a lot of the anger and angst and distrust that occurs, and her reaction, when she's first approached to getting involved, is one of, no, I don't want to do this, and this is just all a bunch of baloney. Well, she finally gets on board, and she actually becomes a real champion as the book moves along. And then, without giving away too much of the ending, things take a turn, and the rug is pulled out, and all of the lean efforts are come crashing down, and they revert back to old style management. And so there's a scene, it's one of my favorite scenes, where she's sitting at her workstation contemplating what had just happened and realizing that it was all gone. And she even mutters under her breath that, she wished that Jim Brown had never shown up and taught them a new way of doing things, because now it made the old ways that much worse. Whereas before, she never knew that the old ways were really that bad. So yeah, that's a scene of loneliness and despair, and realizing that your career is falling apart, and it's like, and there's nothing you can do about it.
I hear this a lot. This is an unfortunate situation because, not too many transformations actually come to fruition, because once leaders figure out that there's an immune system fighting against them, and they have to really change that, and they find out that they're going to be giving up power and a bunch of other factors that go with it, not many have the courage to withstand the storm to actually make the full change. However, I do hear that comment a lot. I wish you never showed me this, or
Right.
I wish, I never had to experience this. It's like, once you see it, you can't unsee it.
Right.
So you just wish no one showed you. It was always there, but you just didn't have the lens to see it through. And it's one thing to see it; it's another to actually experience it then.
Right.
And and then to have that be taken away. You see that also when, like, mergers and acquisitions happen and a culture gets wiped out, and then they see this new regime coming in that's very command and control. It's very heartfelt. It's very emotional. I get that.
We'll continue this in our conversations next week when we start getting into getting employees engaged and how to go about doing that. But
So
for now, we need to wrap this one up.
Yeah, this is the end of our chapter of leadership, and we'll open the chapter of culture, and we'll dive into that.
Very good. All
right,
right,
everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
As we draw the curtains on another fascinating episode, we wanted to express our gratitude for joining us on this enlightening journey. If you're hungry for more captivating and thought-provoking discussions with John Dyer and Dr. Mohamed Saleh, hit that subscribe button to ensure you don't miss a beat. Until next week, keep exploring, stay inquisitive, and stay inspired. See you on the next Behind the Curtain adventure.